Hi YouTubers out there, it's Fortune Cookie 45LC. And we're going to talk about marksmanship. Now there's lots of great videos on marksmanship, how to hit with handguns on the YouTube. And you've got to be a student to study all this. Get all the information you can, sort it all out and see if it makes sense for you. So, I'd like to give you some information tonight that perhaps you don't see on the internet. What it is it's going between the lines. It's filling in some of the gaps. So let's get right down into it. The most important aspect of marksmanship is controlling the trigger. So the first thing we'll talk about is your semi-automatic pistol. And this one is a 1911 Colt 45 semi-automatic pistol. Now this one's been customized, accurized, sights, trigger job, various bells and whistles. You can actually buy it this way without having to have anybody work on it. That's a nice thing about 1911s now. So, with a 1911, one of the nicest things about it, and the reason why a lot of competitive shooters shot with a 1911 in the beginning days of some of the handgun games that we have now, the 1911 was very popular, and the reason why was because of the 1911 trigger. Could be made very clean, very light, very crisp. And that allowed competitors to shoot very quickly because the reset was very quick. Very short reset. No, it's not loaded. So the whole idea is to be able to drop the hammer on a 1911 without the gun moving. And if we do that, the bullets will hit the target. So one of the most important precepts that you'll see on YouTube on marksmanship is that we take our pistol, put the pad of the forefinger on the trigger, and then press the trigger straight back. And the reason why we want to use a pad of the finger on the trigger is so that the finger is off the gun. This part of the finger here is off the gun, so that we cannot cause deflection of the gun to the side when the hammer drops, because we're putting our finger against the trigger, against the gun. So we use a pad and keep the finger away so that we can pull the trigger straight back and not deflect the gun. Well, think about that for a while. The geometry of our finger, now watch this. I'm going to hold the finger still, and now watch what happens when you pull the trigger. What part of that do you see is straight back? You get an arc of the fingertip. And if the finger moves this way at all against the gun, it's even worse. We won't hit doing that. But if we don't move this finger at all, it's still an arc. So how do we press the trigger back? And here's the thing. What happens if we don't use the pad of our finger? We don't want to use the tip. we're supposed to use a pad of the finger. We're not supposed to use the joint. Yet, if we do put our finger against the frame, and we do put our joint on the trigger, and we pull the trigger straight back, the gun doesn't move. So if we happen to like the way it feels to use the joint of our finger, and the gun doesn't move, what's wrong with that? Why do we have to have a space here? And here's the thing that we should think about, and that is, if we press the trigger straight back, notice what happens to the finger. It clears the frame of the gun. If we use the joint of our finger, especially if our fingers are longer, and we pull the trigger straight back, look what happens to this part of the finger. It clears the frame of the gun. What that means is it doesn't matter if your finger is straight here or there is no gap here. If the finger presses the trigger straight back, it doesn't matter what this is doing here. It will not deflect the gun, so you don't have to worry about it. And what part of the finger you use doesn't matter, because what happens is later on, if we're shooting a double action revolver, we have to put our finger on that joint, because the only way you can work a double action pull is you're going to use more of the finger under the trigger. Well, if we had to keep the pad of our finger on there, it's a lot harder to pull that straight back and work that trigger. So if that's the way it is for a double action revolver, why do we have to keep the pad in this finger arrangement? We can shoot just as well if we use more of the finger on the trigger, just as well as if we were shooting a double action revolver. Watch this. The gun doesn't have to move. It doesn't if we pull the trigger straight back. So the question becomes, how do you pull the trigger straight back? Because you'll hear on YouTube that we want to pull the trigger straight back, but they don't tell you how to do it. What do you do to make the trigger go straight back? Is it practice, practice, practice? Or is there some kind of technique involved? Now for technique, we're going to go into a dance called Argentine Tango. Now, in Argentine Tango, there are times when you dance with the lady and you'll be walking with her, and all of a sudden you're going to give her a lead that will put her on one foot, and then you're going to go around and around, and she's going to stay in that spot, and you're going to go around her and take her with you in a turning motion. The way that's done, when you put her on one foot, you have to put her on her body axis so that her balance is assured and she'll feel secure as you go around with her, because you're keeping her on her axis and she can turn around that axis and feel like her balance is always there. The idea is feeling the axis. Also establishing the axis, knowing where that axis is on her body, so that you can put her on that axis and execute the move around that axis. With a gun, the trigger going straight back is because the force of the trigger pull is right down the axis, not only of the gun, but of the bore and the sights. So the trigger pressure is right down this axis. And if we do that, the finger doesn't matter, the gun won't move, the grip supports that action, and we will hit the target. So here's how this works. The sights are used and we hold the sights on target, and then as wherever part of the finger we use, doesn't matter, we're going to press the trigger straight back as if our finger is taking the front sight and pressing the front sight straight back through the notch of the rear sight. So our mind is thinking that we're doing that. Of course, we know that's not possible, but that's the feel. We're taking that front sight and we're pressing the front sight straight back through the notch of the rear sight, actually right to our eye. That's the feel. Front sight is being pulled or pressed straight through the notch of the rear sight, right to our eye. And if we do that, that is the thought that is required to put your trigger finger on axis, on body axis, on barrel axis, straight back to your eye, straight back pull. It starts there with your mind thinking that, and as you do that, it'll also get you to focus on the front sight, which is what we want to do anyway. And as we're pulling that front sight back through that notch, we're going to be smooth. If we're doing it faster, it's fast and smooth. It's not a jerk, but you're just going to take that front sight and bring it right through that rear sight. Right through the notch of the rear sight. And what will happen is your sight picture will maintain itself as the hammer drops. Now YouTubers, give this a try. Do you see how that works? It requires a little bit of proprioception. You gotta be able to feel that barrel axis, feel that bore axis, feel that sight axis. Feel the pull straight back through there. Give this a try and you're going to find that your shooting will improve. You're going to shoot more shots dead center. Fact of the matter is most guns are much more accurate than we are. Now, does that work for a double action revolver? Now every time you put a gun down, you got to check it for clear it again. But here you go. Get a good part of that trigger, and when we pull straight back, what's going to happen is your finger here will not deflect the gun, because physically it's impossible for you to pull that trigger straight back and have this part of your finger go that way into the gun, deflecting it. Not going to happen. So you don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about trying to use a pad of your finger to pull that trigger straight back. You can shoot that way. If it works for you, by all means, but the principle is the same. And that is, as you draw down, that you're going to take that trigger and you're going to feel like you're taking on, like, this is very hard to get that lined up on both sides of the tripod. But the idea is you're going to try and pull that front sight straight back through the rear sight until the hammer drops. Now, if you shoot single action, no problem. you're going to try now as my arm is bent. You're going to do the same thing. Press that trigger straight back by, it's almost like you're trying to pull the front sight straight back through the notch of the rear sight until the hammer drops. So it'll work with a double action revolver, either shooting double action or single action. Finally, the single action revolver. Now, the thing about the single action revolver is that the hammer fall is so slow. The hammer fall is so slow and so long that you have to stay with the trigger a little while longer. So when you cock the piece, once again, get your sight picture and press the trigger as if you're pulling the front sight straight back through the notch of the rear sight until the hammer falls. This will assure you of pulling the trigger straight back because that's the line that the sights are going through the notch, front sight through the notch of the rear sight. That's the axis that you're trying to pull the trigger back on. So if you do that, that's what your mind has to think about doing. And it'll cause you to concentrate on the front sight and concentrate on your alignment in the notch of the rear sight as you're pulling the front sight back through that notch. And that's the way you control the trigger. Now what the grip does is it allows you to have control of the gun so that you can control that trigger finger and apply that technique of straight back pull. Whether the gun be a single action or a double action or a 1911, straight back trigger finger pull, straight back trigger pull. And so hopefully this technique of something borrowed from Argentine tango will help you to improve this very critical aspect of shooting handguns. And it actually applies to rifles too, but it's not as important because the rifle has much more stability. But anyway, YouTubers out there, give this a try. You have to try every little idea. If you're a student of shooting, you'll give this a thought and see if this works for you in your mind first, and if it's worth taking it to the range and spending 50 rounds on it. Actually, the way the modern competitors do things, they break it down and they will fire literally hundreds of shots to test out any new idea that they might have. Because only after you shoot a statistical number of shots does the actual goodness of a certain technique come through or not. But for us, all we can do is put 50 rounds into it. Give it a try. See if this works for you, and if it does work for you and it feels good, by all means, as you continue your shooting career, build on it, improve on it, get better at it. And that's, after all we want to do is improve. Thank you very much, YouTubers. Take care. Have a very nice day. We'll see you in the next video.